Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for tonight's event. Welcome to the culminating live storytelling event, The Flame, Spring of My Youth, a collection of stories told live about childhood memories. And afterwards, we'll have time for open mic. So this event is put on in part by Inlandia Institute, which is a literary nonprofit organization that continues to serve the Inland Empire with literary events during COVID-19 via Zoom and other events online. So my name is Christina Guillen. I'm programs coordinator for Inlandia, and I'm excited. I've been through the past couple of weeks with these presenters and watched their stories change and evolve and grow. And I'm really delighted to introduce this event and tonight's hostess, Stevie Taken. Stevie Taken, who is a theater artist, she's passionate about story and performance. She organized the live storytelling event, Performance Anxiety, which took place at the Menagerie in downtown Riverside. Today, she has the pleasure of working with these wonderful local authors, writers, and entrepreneurs. She has put together this event, The Flame, and let's go ahead and welcome her. Stevie Taken, thank you for all your hard work. Let's take it away.
Thank you, Christina. Very nice introduction. I'm so happy to be here with everyone tonight. Thank you for joining us, or if you're watching this at a later time, thank you as well for showing your support for storytelling. I'm very fortunate and grateful to the Inlandia Institute and to Katie Porter and Christina Guillen for all of their hard work and to supporting this this idea of taking live story performance and putting it online, since all of our lives have required us to shelter in place for the time being. And thank you as well to all of the presenters who've been working really hard the last few weeks. A couple of you, I know for a fact that this was a big challenge, and you challenged yourself, and and I'm really excited for you to share what you've been working on, because all of the stories are really quite interesting and fun and unique. So with that said, we're going to kind of jump on in, and I'm going to introduce our first storyteller. Patrick Bryan is the executive director of the Riverside Arts Council. He is also the founder and artistic director of the Gestalt Theater Project, and has a long list of acting, directing, and producing credits spanning from Hawaii to Germany. You can find his artist spotlight columns in the Press Enterprise every Friday. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Patrick Bryan.
Hello, everybody. So I was an only child, and as many only children have a tendency to be, I was somewhat self-centered. Those who know me might say that that is a trait that continues to this day. I was a rotten child, let's say. When I was 7 years old, my dad was in the Army, and he got stationed in Korea, which was what was called an unaccompanied tour. So that meant that me and my mom could not join him because there were no facilities for spouses or children. So my mother, having been born and raised in Japan, uh, this was a great opportunity, my parents thought, for me to be introduced to the Japanese culture. So me and my mom went to Japan for the first 9 months of my dad's year-long adventure in Korea. So when we first got to Japan, I'm 7 years old. I don't speak a word of Japanese, but of course, I want to be the center of attention. And so I was determined to do exactly that. I went out, and I'm walking around Japan alone, and I see a group of kids, and I think to myself, I want to get their attention. And I go over to them, and it was obvious to me, even though I couldn't understand what they were saying, that they were afraid of something. They wanted to go into what I quickly figured out was this cemetery, and they wanted to look into this mausoleum. And so I was gesturing to them, no, fine, follow me. And so they were in awe of this little American child, and they did follow me. I was the center of attention, and I led them over to this mausoleum, and I looked inside, and I pointed to them. It's like, come on, take a look. There's nothing to be afraid of. So they all crowded around me. We looked, and something inside there made a noise at that moment, and everybody took off running. I never did see those kids again. A couple of kids that I did see later on were these identical twin 5-year-old girls. And they worshiped me for whatever reason. They thought that this American kid that was 2 years older than them they just thought that I was wonderful. So they followed me everywhere, and of course that meant that I couldn't stand them. And I did everything that I could to try to dissuade their attention. I threw things, I yelled at them, but nothing would work. Well, eventually they did grow to fear me. And so that made me then want to go seek them out. And so one day I went through the woods because they lived off in the woods, and I found their place, and I saw them out in front of their house. And so they saw me, and they took off running for their front door. And one of them was carrying a bucket. It was filled with water, and it was too heavy for her to run with. And so she's carrying this. She has to finally set it down. And she steps towards the front door, looks back at the bucket, looks at me, and decides that safety is more important than what's in the bucket. And so she takes off for the front door. And now I'm curious, what is so precious that's in this bucket? So I go over and I take a look inside, and it's a koi fish. And me being the rotten kid that I was, I reached inside that bucket and I picked up that koi fish. I looked at it and I set it on the ground. And now those girls lost all fear of me. They came outside and they stood there, but there was nothing that they could do. So they just looked at me and they looked at the fish. One of them said to me, kawaii, which basically means, but it's cute. And so I looked at the fish, at it gasping, and I picked it up and I put it back in the water. I felt badly. From that point, me and those little girls became the best of friends. And when, after 9 months, me and my mom went to join my dad in Korea because he had gotten a place off of base, it was those two little girls that came to say goodbye. And I'll never forget the image of them as I looked out of the back of the taxi cab as we drove away. Those two little twin girls waving, and me waving out that back window. When we got to Korea, now I was a 7-year-old about to turn 8 who didn't speak a word of Korean. And yet there was a little boy that I instantly became friends with. The place that my dad had gotten off of base essentially was a shack. And the little boy, he went to school barefoot. He really had nothing. But somehow we managed to communicate. We got along great. And when it was time for us to come back to the States, I took all of the comic books that I had been collecting. And it was a good sized stack, not huge, but it was a decent stack. And I took them over to his place and I gave them to him. The look on his face, he had never been gifted anything like this before. Now, he had something that I always admired. It was his only toy. It was a magnet. It was a magnet that to me seemed larger than life. So he looked at those comic books and he looked at me, and then he reached over and he picked up that magnet and he handed it to me. That was his gift to me. And I still have that magnet. I guess that's, I learned empathy. And that's something I think that people might, if I'm lucky, also say about me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I love that story. And little Patrick, Brian's heart grew 3 times. That's how reminds me. We're going to move right along to our next storyteller this evening. I introduce Rachel Maltby, is a former moto journalist, motorcycle and road racer, and MSF writing course instructor. She hung up her helmet to dedicate her time to fiction. You can find her short story collection, The Aqua Miner, on Amazon, and you can also find her work in the upcoming short story collection by Grace and Victory Publishing called A Quiet Afternoon, due out later this year. Everyone, Rachel Maltby.
When I was a little kid, I learned about fear and crazy. My parents, they were rough and tumblers, bikers, alcoholics, worked for a living during the week and rode on the weekends, and they argued as much as they rode. In fact, so much that my first word was a curse word. When I was 4 years old, I went for my first motorcycle ride on the back of my dad's Yamaha VMAX. He set me down on the gas tank in front of him, and we rode up and down the street. I didn't have any shoes or socks on. We didn't have any helmets on. He was one of those parents that most parents look down at. When we got back, of course, when I went to go slide off the motorcycle, I burnt my leg on the exhaust pipe. And so my mom took me into the kitchen, kicking and screaming because I was in pain. And then when I was 9 years old, my dad bought me a Suzuki 80 dirt bike. He painted it a bright rattlekin pink, and he put a Muscle Man sticker on the gas tank, the kind with the bicep curl. And my parents both stood on each side of the driveway, and I rode back and forth between the two of them as they both gave me coaching tips. And my mother, she was on crutches at the time. She taught people how to ride motorcycles for a living. And she kept trying to teach me the concept of easing out the clutch and easing back the throttle at the same time, but it just was not clicking. And so I just chugged and clunked my way back and forth between the two of them pretty much until they lost their patience and I got frustrated. Not long after that, I took my dirt bike out for the first time unsupervised on my own, and I was not by any means ready. Basically, to get back home, I had to go down the alley and down a dirt road to the streets to get back to the driveway. But I was not nearly confident enough to operate this thing and slow down and pull in the clutch without attracting attention. Because it's not like a 9-year-old girl on a bright pink dirt bike can go by undetected without an audience. And at the time, my dad was outside in the front yard working on something, and our neighbor was outside with his friends. So naturally, when I knew I had to go back home, I panicked. Instead of slowing down, I hit the gas instead. And I made the turn from the dirt road to the street okay, but I was going way too fast to make it into the driveway. So what ended up happening was I crashed pretty hard. I low-sided the bike and hit the pavement and slid across and took out the bottom boards of the round pen. And we had horses at the time, but luckily no horses were injured during the making of this story. And I stood up and the bike's leaking gas and the front wheels spinning. And I know I can feel everyone's eyes on me, but I don't turn to look and I have my very first panic attack. And I just can't catch my breath. I can't breathe. I'm crying uncontrollably. I don't know what to do. I'm embarrassed. So I stomp down the driveway and I go to pass my dad, and my dad says, "That's it? Are you giving up?" And of course, this comment only makes me even more angry. And I stomp past him and I stomp in the house and I go down the hallway and I go in my room and I slam the door and then I sit on my bed and I just sit there and cry. And I'm just sitting there crying and thinking, you know, I've been accused of being a spoiled brat only child, but I don't want to be accused of also being a quitter. And I think about what my dad said to me. Is that it? Are you giving up? And I think, no, I'm not going to give up. So I go back outside and he helps me pull the dirt bike out from underneath the round pen and I get back on. But after that, I was afraid of it. Basically, the bike sat for another year until he sold it. But ever since he sold it, I was absolutely obsessed with getting another one. I had unfinished business with that dirt bike. And I begged my parents throughout my adolescence to get me another dirt bike, and they wouldn't let me get another one because they knew how I reacted the first time. So finally, I'm 17 years old. I'm a senior in high school. I have my own money. I have a job. So I sign up for the MSF class at the Honda Center in Colton, which is where my mom used to teach. And on the way there, we're driving and she's talking to me. She says, okay, if you want to pass, she says, don't freak out. Don't cry, don't panic, just stay calm. And so, of course, with her standing there watching me as I'm going through the class, there's a little bit of pressure. And my MSF debut is naturally as tumultuous as the first time I got on the dirt bike. I still hadn't figured the clutch out, and I dropped the bike twice. And the second time I'm looking at it on the ground and I'm thinking of what she said to me, don't freak out. And the instructor walks over and he picks up the bike, and I look at him and I say, are you going to kick me out? And he says, no. And he hands the bike back to me. And I keep riding. And something magical happened after that. I figured out that clutch. I figured out how to finally do the ease with the clutch and the ease back on the throttle in this perfect, gentle dance between the two. And I passed the class. And on her way home, my mom says to me, I didn't think you were going to make it. And that comment from her stung a little bit, but it also gave me the satisfaction of knowing that I proved her wrong. And in the next several years, my life would revolve around motorcycles. I'd write for magazines, I'd road race, I'd probably crash half a dozen times and get enough moving violations to get a wink from Steve McQueen. But the best part of that life that I had was teaching. I would eventually go back to teach MSF just like my mother, and I would teach alongside my mother. And I would have people in my class that would struggle just as much, if not more, than I did. But I would be there on the day that they passed to hand them their certificate and to have that satisfaction of knowing that they were my student and that they made it through. In fact, I had one man who was a retired horse jockey, and he had cancer. And the one thing he wanted before he died was to ride a motorcycle across the country. And I got to be his instructor. And I've heard people say that if you crash, maybe you shouldn't be on a motorcycle. And I also know that today's racing champions spend about as much time on the ground as they do on the podium. You just have to know the difference between fear and crazy. Fear is knowing that you could get hurt doing a thing, and crazy is never trying. Thank you.
Fantastic, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing. Very inspiring story and important message as well. Our next storyteller is Alban J. Chamberlain. Grew up in San Bernardino, California. He's a graduate of San Bernardino Valley College and has a BA in Travel and Tourism Management from BYU Hawaii campus. After serving as a supply officer in the U.S. Navy Reserves, he graduated with an MBA degree from the American Graduate School of International Management in Glendale, Arizona. He has worked as a federal bank examiner with the FDIC, a secondary teacher of Spanish, social studies, and ESL, as well as a retirement counselor with Nationwide Retirement Services. He started writing poems, short stories, and novels in the past 5 years after joining a local writers group. Everyone, Alban J. Chamberlain.
The name of my story is The South Pacific and South Central. Now, when I was a child growing up in San Bernardino, I never really had a chance to get outside of the valley or outside of the Inland Empire. So the only reason I ever got a chance to visit the great big metropolitan booming city of Los Angeles or anywhere in Los Angeles County is the fact that I had 3 aunts living there. My Aunt Florine, who lived in the downtown area and later in South Central. I had an aunt living near the Santa Anita racetrack in Arcadia, and another aunt living up by the foothills in Altadena. Now, my Aunt Florine, living in Los Angeles, was a medium height lady with dark curly hair. She had a warm voice and personality and infinite patience with children. She was what people back in those days would call a career woman because she hadn't married in her early 20s, like most women aspire to in those decades. In fact, she was a secretary for a large insurance company there in downtown Los Angeles and lived in her own apartment until she met and married my uncle, Herb Stoltz. Now, Herb Stoltz was uh, he was a stout, balding, very good natured, friendly man of Germanic ancestors. He was an entrepreneur and loved running his own business. When they married, he had several half grown children and was recently divorced. Now, he had purchased a diner on the corner of 5th and Western there in South Central that was called Tal's Diner. And it used to be a Jewish deli, but it became a soul food diner because the Jewish population was moving out to the suburbs and being replaced by African Americans in that area. Now, when he bought the diner, he loved working in the kitchen. He loved working in a busy kitchen. He loved cooking. And Tal's Diner was just the place for him. It wasn't a fancy sit down restaurant. It didn't have any fancy menus or tablecloths or waiters serving wine. It seated only about 50 people, but it was busy every day it was open, and especially during the morning and afternoon dinner crowds. Now, the people who went there were, they came for the down home, fresh cooked meals. He always gave very large portions, and they came because they were treated like family and friends rather than just casual customers. Now, the menu at Tal's Diner was really different. It was a perfect recipe for what I would call an early burial up on Boot Hill. I remember there was lots of fried pork, chicken, catfish. There was fried okra, tomatoes, and sweet potato fries. My uncle would save the fat drippings from the pork in a coffee can and make gravy from the pork drippings, as well as seasoning for the grits, the collard greens, and the black-eyed peas. Now, he always, the sights and smells of the diner were just as important as the menu because there was always the friendly laughter and conversation between friends and families that came there to eat. You could hear the cooks yelling orders from the kitchen. You could smell the spicy, oily smell in the air and the humid air of all the food coming out of the fryers and fresh food, fresh baked meals coming out of the oven. I think the smells was as much as the menu was what brought in the hungry people into the diner. Now, he always hired the local cooks from the neighborhood, and they were accustomed to, they were the tradition of the Southern tradition of soul food, cooking soul food meals. And so when you went into the kitchen, there was always large buttered biscuits and gravy, big hunks of bacon, as well as honey cornbread. So going to Tal's Diner to eat was kind of like a trip through the deep South. Now, whenever we'd go to visit my aunt and uncle, we had to go to the downtown station at San Bernardino and buy bus tickets because my dad didn't drive. He didn't have a driver's license. We did not own a family car because he was blind in one eye. I always loved sitting by the window as we traveled down the newly completed 10 freeway. That cut the driving time to Los Angeles in half, but it was full of cars moving faster than I'd ever seen cars and trucks move before in my life. I always loved seeing the train yards in Colton, the big equipment tearing up Slover Mountain, the smokestacks of Kaiser Steel Mill, as well as the vineyards out in Cucamonga and Ontario. There was wineries and packing houses and orchards along the way. But once you passed over Kellogg's Hill into Pomona, everything became suburban and densely packed. It was the first time that you would see rush hour traffic and air pollution. And everything just seemed so busy and so fast as I went into Los Angeles. We would go to the bus station in downtown, and my aunt would always pick us up there at the depot and drive us to her home on 5th Avenue in South Central, about a mile from Tal's Diner. Now, in those days, the neighborhood was really neat and clean. The houses were smaller than today's standard, less than 1,000 feet, most of them, but they all had neat, tidy front lawns and backyards. I remember the sidewalks in the street were well maintained, and every house had a tidy green lawn that was a shortcut. The only signs of menace or urban decay around that area were the heavy iron bars across the windows and doors of the businesses and the barbed wire above the fences of the shops and storage yards. We didn't have any of that in San Bernardino, nor did we have any air pollution at that time, or the painted graffiti that was just starting to pop up in Los Angeles. Now, the reason I love visiting my aunt and uncle's house the most of any of my relatives was because they had a large attic up above their house that you could climb up a wooden ladder to get up there into the attic. And my uncle loved he loved sailing and he loved the ocean, but he was never able to get out and do it very often. So the entire attic was decorated with a Polynesian decor. I remember there's bamboo strips on the walls. There was fishing nets with starfish and seashells in them. There was tiki, wooden carved tiki masks and statues on the shelves. There was nautical charts and gear on the walls as well as wooden model sailing ships. There was 3 cots up there that were partitioned off with strings with wooden beads on them. It was so much fun to sleep up there at night, having the adults downstairs telling their boring old stories about the good old days while the children talked about stuff that we wanted to talk about. There was a door leading off from the attic that went directly down to the wooden stairs leading to the backyard. So you wouldn't have to go down the wood ladder and go through the back door. Now in that backyard, there was a ginormous avocado tree that was at least 70 feet tall and 50 feet wide in the canopy. And there in the shade of the canopy, my uncle had built a large tree house. And it was between the 3 major branches of the tree and was secured in place with metal braces and stout ropes. Now the tree house had a wide wooden platform, and the wooden walls and framework of the walls and roof were thatched over with bamboo. It had a window with a spyglass, nautical charts on the walls and other nautical gear. It had more fishing nets and seashells, and it was modeled after the tree house in the Swiss Family Robinson. Now, to get up to the tree house, you had to climb up the ladder, a rope ladder that had wooden slats about every 2 feet. And for some reason, the adults never thought it was dangerous to have unsupervised children scampering up and down a rope ladder into a high tree house. But we would go out there and play for hours up in that tree house, pretend to be characters from Swiss Family Robinson. And the adults were indoors, of course, telling stories about current events and the good old days, and unmolested by any children, until one of us would get thirsty and we'd go running through the back door and asking for cold lemonade from the refrigerator. Once our thirst was quenched, we would go racing back out the back door, up the rope ladder again, up into our South Pacific treehouse. Now, we had the most fun of all when any of my cousins were visiting from Bakersfield or St. George, Utah, or my cousin Johnny was visiting over from Arcadia. Now, Johnny was a Johnny was a young man who was very calm disposition. He loved to talk. He had been born with mental conditions, so that because of his birth, and he was like a little kid, even though he's a teenager. Now, when I went back as a high school, I found that my uncle had torn out that tree house and the tree because he had succumbed to the building craze of swimming pools. He had put in a moderate-sized swimming pool there in the late 60s. And it was fun to go swim in the swimming pool, but it wasn't the same fun as climbing up the tree house, climbing up the ladder into the tree house. Now, the attic was still there, but it seemed diminished in size and it wasn't nearly as enticing at that age. The decor was still there and the ambiance, but it seemed as if some magical spell had worn out. Now, I can still close my eyes and see that ginormous tree in my mind. And hopefully by writing down the story and telling it, it'll be there even after I pass away from this life. Thank you for sharing my story with me.
Aha, there we go. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Thank you, Al. You gave me some ideas for lunch tomorrow. All right, we're going to move right along. Our next, I'm going to introduce our next storyteller. Faiza Rajput is a writer from Southern California. She has her BA in English, creative writing from Cal State University, San Bernardino, and her MFA in writing from Otis College of Art and Design, where she was in the publishing track. Faiza is a Los Angeles Review of Books 2019 Publishing Fellow and was recently nominated for an ICAD postgraduate teaching fellowship by Otis. You can find her at faizarajput.com or on Instagram at forfaiza, or on her website, badbride.com. Everyone, Faiza Rajput.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. So today I'm going to tell you a story about a station wagon, my godfather, growing up first generation American, and loss and rebirth. So this is my godfather. His name was Rudolph Jenkins, and then he changed his name when he converted to Islam before I was born to Ramat Jamal, which it means big smile, I believe is what he used to tell me. So my parents are from a minority persecuted sect of Islam called Ahmadiyyat. And so they escaped religious persecution and came to the United States in search of a better life. And my godfather was the first person to pick them up from LAX airport. And because he didn't want to be confused for a Black Panther when he converted to Islam, he converted coincidentally to the same religion as my parents. And the small grouping of them were the first Ahmadis in Southern California. And they helped to start the mosque here in Chino together. Well, I grew up with this man in my life, and not only was he like a wonderful father figure for me as a godfather, but he was a wonderful father figure for both of my parents, and he taught us how to acclimate and learn how to be American and learn how to feel accepted and integrate and speak English and drive a car. And he helped my mother get a driver's license, and he taught my father and mother both how to shoot a gun in Lytle Creek way before when it was allowed. He had a 1973 station wagon. It was a Grand Torino. And he used to come pick us up in this Grand Torino, and he would take us basically all across the United States in it. And so from when I was a little child, he would take all of my mother, my father, and my siblings and I, and he would basically travel us around the country and show us different state parks and how to be American and how to basically integrate. And so we loved it. We grew up with it. It was wonderful. And one year he picked us up, and it was Christmas break. It was right before my sister was born, and I was the youngest child at the time. And so he picked us up, and we had 2 weeks off for school, and he was going to take us to Yellowstone National Park. And when he came with a turtle shell on top of the station wagon. And it took my parents the whole day to fill up the top of the station wagon with different things for the trip that we could use along the way. So we had blankets, not sleeping bags. We had pots and pans, not cooking equipment. My parents were making like salen and rice and chai along the way. And my godfather loved it. He was so used to our quirkiness and how we were. And when the car was packed up and we were ready to go, it was late by that point. And so as we were driving along the 10 freeway, and the 15 freeway, I'm sorry, as we were driving along the freeway late at night, it was right before Christmas, and my godfather used to listen to 88.1 smooth jazz on the radio. And the announcer on the radio, he turned the car radio into a Santa transmitter. And when my parents were asleep, I was kind of sitting in the back wondering like why we had to leave before Christmas. And it was the first time I realized that as a small Muslim girl, I didn't get to celebrate Christmas. And I didn't understand if it was because I was a bad kid or if it was because we had to ditch Santa before Santa came to our house. There was just no explanation of this except for that Muslims don't celebrate Christmas. We have our own holidays too. And so I was really wanted to see Santa, and I was really curious about Santa, and I wanted to have a Christmas tree and that whole experience. And so I was kind of like sullen in the car, just quietly by myself. And then when my parents fell asleep, I went from the third row back flip up seat in the station wagon that faces the oncoming drivers, and I went into the middle seat, and I quietly was like pinching the leather trim of my godfather's headrest, and just to like let him know I was there and I was still awake, and it was late at night. And he just drove quietly, and then he said, "Faiza, do you hear that? Listen." And then he turned up the radio and he said, "Do you hear that? Listen." And it was like jingling on the radio, and the announcer said, "Any minute now, Santa is going to fly over in his sleigh." And so I immediately looked out the window, and it was the first time that I saw stars fixed into the sky. But as we were moving, the stars weren't moving, they just stayed still. But there was nothing else. There was no clouds, there was no sleigh, there was no Rudolph, there was nothing. And so as I was like listening closer and closer and waiting for something to happen, there was this loud explosive sound, and it was that the top of the turtle shell had basically blown off the car on the freeway, and all of our belongings had flown onto the freeway. And so in that panic, everybody just like woke up and was alarmed. And my godfather pulled off to the side of the road, and they started immediately trying to figure out how to pick things up off the side of the road. And since then, I wondered, am I going to see Santa, or am I ever going to celebrate a Christmas? And I think that my godfather not only gave me an experience of being a Santa Claus for me, but also inspired me to maybe want to like be that type of person also. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Faiza. That's so sweet. He sounds like a very special man. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see. Our next storyteller is me. It was the 80s. Jelly bracelets, hair bands, the Reagan administration, a television show named for the acronym Alien Life Form, and the last vestige of loosely enforced vehicle safety regulations. In the early part of the 80s, my dad went into business for himself. He was the antenna specialist. For those of you who are listening who may not know what an antenna is, way back in the day, well, imagine like a really gigantic aluminum sort of insect-looking thing that would be fixed on top of people's roofs. And that's how folks back then tuned in and received and got access to television. And this was decades before Netflix. So when he started his own business, he also bought a service van, which was needed for his business. It was an early Ford Econoline model, and had on every side of the van, front and back, was painted with the in large bold. Here's a later picture, a different angle. You see added some red for added effect, and it had information about the business, and of course our home phone number on it, because his office was at the house. A couple years into running his business, our family vehicle, our station wagon, broke down somewhere in Utah, and it was time to replace the vehicle. And at the same time, my dad decided to buy a second service van. That's that white van sort of in the back. You see the back part of it. And so his old work van, instead of buying replacing the station wagon with a whole nother vehicle, instead, he converted that van with all of the logo and all of that information into our family van. It was the Taken family van. And he did so by attaching 4 single passenger seats that he found at a junkyard to a piece of plywood so that he could easily slide it in and out via the back doors. Because the seats weren't actually attached to the vehicle, anytime my mom, who drove the van, and all of us around for many years, anytime she would stop short or ascend a hill in compliance with the laws of gravity, for the passengers in the back, we would be lurched forward or backwards about 2.5 feet. And that was our family van, much to the horror of my older sister, Jo, who was 14 at the time, and she was just beginning high school, and knew that this would be the vehicle that she would be dropped off and picked up in. I think at one point she arranged another way of getting to and from school, at least. When I quizzed my mom about her memories of the family van, the first thing she said was, well, it was convenient because you could always find it in a parking lot. And that's true. Never couldn't find that van. In fact, it was a beacon. And all throughout the 80s and best part of the 90s, when we had the van in our family, we would receive reports from our friends almost on the weekly of Taken family sightings. I saw you driving down the 91 freeway the other day, or were you at the Dairy Queen yesterday? Yes, we were often at Dairy Queen. One time we got back from a family vacation, and the following Sunday, our pastor asked if we had been in Kings Canyon, Sequoia, because he thought that he saw our van parked in a campground. Yep, that's the Takens all over the place. And so that van was in my family for over 12 years. My mom drove it around. And as vehicles get older, they want to start developing some, issues. It's perfectly normal. One of the more annoying things that I remember is when you were sitting shotgun. Often, if we were driving down the freeway, about every 15 or 20 minutes or so, you'd have to manually roll down the window to adjust the side view mirror, because no matter how many times my dad would fix the mirror and tighten the bolt that attached the mirror, it always came loose. And so that was one of the more annoying things. Another problem that the van started to develop at one point was that it would catch on fire sometimes. Not always. And usually when it did catch on fire, my mom just had to turn off the ignition and the fire would be put out. So problem solved. But one particular time was especially scary. We were leaving dance class, and my mom was pulling out of the driveway or the parking lot, and looked at the side view mirror and saw the smoke and the flames coming out of the exhaust. And at this point we had a drill. My mom would put the van in park, turn off the ignition, and then we'd open the doors, and the drill was just to run very fast and very far away from the fire. So that's what we were doing. My mom reached behind, grabbed the box of Seeks candy that she had just purchased at the Galleria, and my sister Sammy, my mom, and I and our brother just behind us start running away. At one point though, we look to behind us and we realize that my little brother Justice isn't with us. He's still back at the van, and what he's currently conducting is the drill, the earthquake drill, the duck and cover, which we learned at school. So we yelled at him to, hey, let's go. And he picked himself up and started running away as well. And then the fire eventually extinguished itself, and my parents had the van towed home that night. And I remember pleading with my dad to please, either just get rid of it. It feels unsafe, or at least take it to a mechanic and not fix it yourself. But he insisted that he could fix it. He was going to fix it himself. And about within a week or two later was New Year's Eve of, I believe just before 1999. And my mom had gone to a friend's house and was ready to leave. But when she went to leave, she couldn't get the van to start. So my dad drove his van to the house to where my mom was. He was able to get the van started, but he had thought to himself, maybe the problem with it this time was that it was out of gas, because you couldn't really tell because the gas gauge hadn't been working at that point either. So the first thing they did is they went to the gas station and they filled up both tanks of gas. That's when I learned that recently, that the van had 2 tanks of gas, kind of like a cow has multiple. Anyhow, so they filled up both tanks and they were continuing on their way home. And my dad was following behind my mom, and inevitably, look out the side mirror, there's smoke and then flames. So my mom immediately pulls over. My dad jumps out, runs over the van, gets underneath it, and he's now throwing dirt at the flames to extinguish it, but it's not doing it. It's not doing the job this time. And then he thought, okay, well, if I just disconnect the fuel line from the exhaust, then that'll do it. So he disconnects the fuel line, and my mom is pleading to him for him to just please give up and just roll away because the flames are not extinguishing. It's getting real bad. At that point, after my dad disconnected the fuel line, he realized that, oh no, the fuel is now pooling onto the ground and around him. And he finally gave up on the van and he rolled away just in time before the entire Taken family van exploded and engulfed in a sea of flames. And that was the end of the Taken family van. Eventually, my parents did replace our family vehicle with a safer but far less interesting vehicle. And that's the Taken family van. And I want to show you just a quick photo of my family. This is from sometime in the 80s. There's my mom, my dad, Steve, Peggy, Steve, my sister, Trishma. There's my elder sister, Jo. She was the one who was not happy about having to be right around in it as a teenager. I didn't really care much. Hair, yes. There's my brother, Justice. Sammy, she did not consent to that perm. It's still a point of contention today. And that's me. My tongue is prominently featured there because I had a loose tooth that day. Sears family photos. Thank you so much for listening. The family van we've got lots and lots more stories of the family van. Anyhow, we're going to move right along. I'm going to introduce our next storyteller. She is Deborah Price Jackson, has been a storyteller since childhood. She credits her older brother Bill for the horrors of her story.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. And I want to start off first by showing a picture of what I look like as a younger kid and growing up. Shortly after I was born, Mother and Daddy moved us from the housing projects to rent half of a 2-story brick side-by-side duplex on Eastwood Street in the east side of Columbus, Ohio. Now, the duplex was my favorite place to live that I shared with my 3 siblings, my older sister, who was 2 years older, my older brother who was 1 year older, and then my little brother who was 3 years younger. And we lived in the duplex from the mid-50s to 1963, from the time I was an infant until I was about 8 years old. It was built in the 20s and it had beautiful hardwood floors, and had a stairwells that ran from the living room all the way up to the 2nd floor. When you went to the left of the stairwells, it was my brother's bedroom. And when you went to the right of the stairwells, it was the bedroom I shared with my sister, and then my parents' bedroom. Now, the house was really old, and because it was so old, the floorboards would creak anytime you would walk on it. It was impossible not to hear someone walking upstairs if you were down in the living room. The bedroom to play in, though, was our parents' bedroom, and that was because we weren't supposed to play in it. It had a really nice fireplace, and in the fireplace, my older brother Bill would lead us to taking a cigarette lighter and setting fire to Michael's Green Army men just to watch them melt. Well, one time, one of the Army men jumped free and landed on the bare hardwood floor, and was melting. We got really scared, and we knew that something wet would put out fire. So we went over to my mother's vanity and picked up the largest bottle of perfume and went back and poured it over the melting Army man. His last hurrah was to burst into flames. We screamed. Who knew that perfume wasn't the same kind of wet as water? So we ran down to the bathroom, got wet washcloths, came back and threw it on top of on the Army man. Well, our mom heard her screams, and she followed the trail of water down to her bedroom, and we were there standing with our hands behind our back, and washcloth in our hands, and not meeting her eye. Well, it didn't matter because her eyes were fixed on the puddle of water covering the large burned part of her floor that held the cremains of the brave soldier. The answer that came to the question, "What did you do?" was followed by, "We didn't do anything." However, Michael, the youngest, yielded to her glare and ratted us out. And we were all sentenced to wait till your father gets home. Now, we loved watching cartoons in our living room. Our favorites were like Bugs Bunny, Mighty Mouse, Yogi Bear, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and our favorite, the Roadrunner. That beep beep, or as we heard it, meet meet, always sent us laughing because it was the Roadrunner outwitting Wile E. Coyote once again. We also had an attic in our house, and this attic had a stairwells that led up to a trap door. My mother was afraid to go up the stairs into the attic, so she had a habit of storing things on the stairs. And the things she would store would be like our Halloween costume. And they would be like bunnies and ghosts and clowns and cowboys and princesses and worst, witches. Now, the attic door was in the bedroom that I shared with Linda, and the attic door would not stay closed and it didn't lock. So my father pushed my bed up against the attic door to keep it closed. So lights out, trying to sleep, I could hear the scratch of the witches trying to get out of the door. I came to believe that it was me and Mighty Mouse to be the only ones that stood between the witches and my family. My father worked 2 jobs. He had rotating days off, and he would, when he had both his night job and his day job off at the same time, he would come home and want to spend time with my mother down in the living room. So mother would put us to bed early and made sure we bathed and brushed our teeth and made sure that we were all tucked in before she headed back downstairs. And she always called out, now go to sleep. And then she would head downstairs to be with my dad in the living room. But Billy had other ideas. The night is clear and silent. My sister and I hear a whispered, meet me. And then the creaky crunching of the hallway floor. We start giggling and we hide deeper into our blankets, under our blankets. Meet me. Then we hear the creak again of the floor, and we get settled and we start worrying and this exciting anticipation. And then there's creak, and our brothers run in and they jump on us and they start beating us up and punching us underneath the blanket. And we try to kick them off and knock them to the floor. And there came, I thought I told you kids to go to sleep. My brothers would whack us one more time really hard, then jump off and then run back to their bedrooms. The night is clear and silent. Meet me, creak, meet me, creak, meet me. And our brothers would be again pounding us. And again, we would hear, I thought I told you kids to go to sleep. My brothers would run giggling back down the hall. The night is clear and silent. Meet me. This time, when my brothers run into our room, a tall, dark silhouette appears in the dark doorway from the hallway, following them in. It stands for a moment on its tree trunk legs. There's steam hissing out of the darkness of its head. There is a black snake moving around at the end of one of his steel pipe arms. It cants its head for a minute before bellowing, your mother told you to go to sleep, as he stomps into the room, whipping and nipping and whipping and nipping my brothers on the back of their legs as they run down the hall, and my sister and I pray for them. But we pretend we're asleep, just in case the silhouette comes back for us. The shrieking and the yelling starts to calm down as we hear the stomp of our father going down the stairs. The air is clear and silent. Meet me. That's the end of my story.
Thank you, Deborah. That's very sweet memories of your brother. Brothers can definitely make childhood memories more interesting. I know mine did. Moving right along for our next storyteller. Charlotte Ransom McKenzie is a native of California and has lived in Riverside for over 50 years, off and on. After exploring other cities in Southern California, Charlotte and her husband, Bob, moved back to Riverside and purchased the home Charlotte grew up in from her parents in 2005. Charlotte considers herself to be an artist in disguise as a realtor. She has always loved performing, and when she is not selling real estate, she can be found on stage at the Riverside Community Players or working on art projects with the 52 Project at the Riverside Art Museum. She is excited to be a part of The Flame, her first Inlandia event. Thank you to Stevie and Katie for creating this creative outlet. You're very welcome. And everyone, Charlotte.
There we go. Hello. Thank you so much. Yeah, I am a native Californian, as I mentioned in my intro. I actually wasn't born here, but I consider myself to be native because we moved here when I was 6 years old, and I've lived in Riverside for most of my life. And being a native Californian, like most Californians, I know that we live with earthquakes. They're here. Love them, hate them, however you feel about them, they're always going to be a part of our lives. And as a matter of fact, I don't think anybody really loves earthquakes, but I know that we tolerate them and we get used to them, and sometimes we even learn to not fear them. And I kind of consider myself to be of that last group. I have taught myself maybe to not fear earthquakes. You'll call me jaded, but we're constantly being told that the big one's coming and we're just waiting for it, and we just got to roll with it, right? So to speak. But wherever you are, when you experience your first earthquake, I think it's probably something that's going to leave a lasting impression. I know that when I had my first earthquake, it left an impression on me, and it was a doozy. It was February 9th, 1971, and I was 8 years old. And we had the Sylmar quake. And the Sylmar quake was a 6.5 earthquake. It happened in San Fernando Valley, and I was living in Riverside at the time. And in Riverside, we felt the earthquake, and I was scared. I was scared. It scared my little 8-year-old self a lot. And just so you can see, here's what I looked like when I was 8 years old. I had my braids, and I was scared of earthquakes, apparently. This earthquake hit very, very early in the morning. It started at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was before we were up. So I remember getting woken up, and the house is shaking, and I'm shaking, and there's this rumbling sound all over the place. And my first instinct, jump out of bed and run around the room screaming, which is exactly what I did. You know, unfortunately, those lessons that they tried to teach us at school about duck and cover and what to do when an earthquake hits, none of that came into my mind as the adrenaline was running through my terrified body. So earthquake ends, and my mom's calling upstairs. Are you guys okay? You know, my sister and I shared a room on the second floor of our home in Riverside, and she was 5. And by the way, she never moved. She didn't get out from under the covers. No reaction whatsoever. I was terrified, probably still crying when my mom called up. And so my sister answers for us. Well, if Charlie would stop running around the room screaming, maybe the house would stop shaking and I could get back to bed. She had no clue that there was even an earthquake, that there was any danger whatsoever. She thought I was causing the house to shake. Well, I got over my fear of earthquakes, and I don't run around the room screaming anymore when they happen. And in fact, I think I kind of sort of, in some instances, became an earthquake therapist. So the second part of my story has to do with where I feel like I became that. It's 21 years after the Sylmar quake. I am living in Palm Desert, and I am working at the Hyatt Grand Champions Resort. Let's see, that's me and my future husband at the time, and that perm was a choice, believe it or not. So I have been working at the Grand Champions. It's June and it's hot in the summer, and that's when we bring people in to wine and dine them and show them what a wonderful place our hotel is, so that they'll book their conventions at the hotel. So that's what we were doing this weekend on June 26th, 1992. And guess what happened that weekend? The biggest earthquake to hit California in over 40 years, the Landers quake. That one happened in Landers, California, and it was a 7.3, 7.6, lasted over a minute. And it was, I thought when it hit, I thought, yeah, that this is the big one. I thought it was going to be the big one. Turns out it wasn't, but again, it was an early morning quake, and you know, you wake up and everything's shaking. And if you've lived through enough earthquakes, when an earthquake hits, you kind of stop and go, oh, is that an earthquake? I think it's an earthquake. Is it going to be the big one? I don't know. And so you kind of wait. You don't run around screaming right away. You wait. And so that's what I was doing. I was sitting in my bed waiting. Is this one going to be bad? And it was bad. And then I thought, okay, maybe I should get out of my bed. And so eventually, by the time the earthquake subsided, I was in my doorway, which is what they told us to do at the time. And I'm looking across the hallway at my housemate who is renting a room from me. And she's running around the room screaming like I did 21 years before. So I become earthquake therapist. I have to calm her down. It's not that bad. It's just an earthquake. It was her first earthquake. While I'm doing this, my phone is ringing. It's the hotel calling. We have clients in town who are freaking out at the hotel. The hotel didn't fare that well. You know, we've got crystal chandeliers. A lot of them clashed together and broke. The bar glass was broken. They needed us to get in right away to calm everyone down. So our original plan was to do a really nice breakfast that morning. Well, that didn't happen because they had to turn the gas off, the gas lines, just in case they were broken, to make sure everything was okay. But we did have a tea time for the golf course. So I told everybody, grab a croissant, get your cup of coffee, let's go out and play golf. So that's what we did. And that's what you do in Palm Desert. You go out and you play golf. So we did, and it worked. You know, we got out on the golf course. It was a lovely day. People are relaxing, getting into the game. About the middle of our game, we're up on one of the greens where we're assessing who's going to hit the ball in first. You know, you figure out who's the furthest, whatever. And I hear it. I hear that sound that you can hear when an earthquake is coming. If it's a rolling earthquake, a lot of times you hear it before you feel it, and that's what I heard. And I look up, and I'm looking down the fairway, and the fairway is moving. And it's not because the grass is blowing in the wind. They keep that grass pretty short on the golf course. It's moving because the golf course is undulating in a rippling kind of a way as the earthquake comes towards us. And I'm kind of mesmerized for a minute because it looks like this beautiful green chiffon scarf that's just blowing in the wind as it comes towards us. But I know for a fact that when it hits, it is not going to be beautiful. It's not going to be soft. It's not going to be nice. And I need to let my clients who were not facing the fairway figure out what's going on. And all I could think of to say was, guys, and I pointed to the fairway. So they turned around. A few of them freaked out. One of them was actually happy as the earthquake kind of rumbled past us and went on beyond down the next fairway. We looked down and his ball had been knocked into the hole, so that was good. But my clients, they didn't end up booking the hotel. 2 major earthquakes in one morning was a bit much for them. They went and booked somewhere else. But I am sure that to this day, they tell the story just as I do about the earthquake coming down the fairway. You know, it's kind of interesting being a native Californian, seeing how other people react to earthquakes. Because we're in California, we're constantly being told the big one's coming, the big one's coming. And so when an earthquake hits, we're like, yeah, okay, is it the big one? Oh, that was just a 5.2 or a 6.1. That's nothing, right? That's not the big one. But there is one thing that we know for sure. When you're in California, you're going to have earthquakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's so sweet. And I adore that you wore your hair in pigtails to match your 8-year-old photo. Very cute. We have our final storyteller this evening before the open mic portion. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce him now. After teaching high school in Riverside for 34 years, Robert Merrill has retired and has written his 3rd play and become obsessed with baking cakes and bread. Robert Merrill, everyone.
You gotta unmute him. I think I'm still on.
There we are. Hi. Remember me? Well, Maybe this will help. I was the kid everyone picked on in school. I was the kid whose mom bought his clothes at Sears in the husky department. I was the kid with the hair, and yes, I used to have lots of hair, that refused to part down the center and feather back. No matter how much time, no matter how much product, the moment I stepped out in Virginia's humidity, my hair popped out into a frizzy fro. Legions of combs lost their teeth trying to tame my frizz. I was the kid that sounded funny. Dad was from New England. Mom's family was Italian. I was born in the South and have a fat tongue that often gets in the way of my words. I was the kid that missed a lot of school because he was sick with constant ear infections. I was the kid picked last for the teams. When I was at the plate, the bat went farther than the ball. But there was one thing I was good at, being a target. School was a battlefield and I was constantly on guard for incoming. And when I was face down in the mud or the snow, there was one thought that brought me peace: the farm. About 2 hours away at the foot of the Shenandoah Mountains, we had enough land where we had a barn where we kept the equipment and the chickens, a field where we grew carrots, lettuce, and radishes, and an orchard bursting with apple, cherry, orange, and pear. Dad had a couple that ran the place for us, but we got down there wherever we could, especially on the weekends or when something was being harvested. And if something urgent came up, Mom or Dad would take me with them, even on a school day. Well, one school day during recess, I was sitting under the slide reading, and I heard my name come over the loudspeaker, and I looked and I saw my teacher, Mrs. Davenport, waving me in. I trailed behind her through the double doors and down the hall, wondering what did I do to lose recess time. And when I got to the room, my mom was there. And she told me to get my things because we were going to Fort Belvoir, the closest military base. Now, Fort Belvoir on the weekend meant the church and the commissary. On a weekday, it meant that I had another doctor's appointment at DeWitt Army Hospital. So I went around the little wall where my cubby was to get my things, but I could hear Mrs. Davenport and my mom talking. And Mrs. Davenport told my mom that she was concerned about me keeping up with the rest of the class because I was missing so much school because of the farm. Hearing the word farm, I rushed back around the corner and right into the glare of my mother. We locked eyes for a moment, and then she turned and said to Mrs. Davenport, "The farm won't be a problem much longer. We're selling it." Now, being so young, I didn't know you could both hate and love the same person so intensely at the exact same moment. I hated my mom for taking the farm from me, but I loved her for not telling my secret. There was no farm, there never had been. It's something I made up to make myself feel better, to make me look not like the weird kid who missed a lot of school because he was sick, but the cool, sort of interesting kid who led a fabulous life that included a farm. So Mom and I are walking back down the hallway, not speaking. I'm staring at the ugly linoleum tile, and she's fishing another Benson and Hedges menthol out of her purse. And right before we get to the double doors, I remembered I forgot my coat. So I rush back to the room, and Mrs. Davenport's looking out the window. And I try to sneak in, but she heard me. And she came over. She knelt down, she gave me a hug and said, "Oh, Robbie, honey, I know how much the farm meant to you. I'm sure you'll miss it." And before she let go, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "And Robbie, honey, oranges don't grow in Virginia." She knew there was no farm all along, and perhaps you did too. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Such a wonderfully told story. Okay, that's it for all of our pre-prepared storytellers. Thank you to all of you who participated in the workshops and in this event this evening. Patrick, Rachel, Al, Faiza, Deborah, Charlotte, and Robert, thank you very much. And of course, thank you again to Christina and to Katie for making this possible. We do have, before we I hand over to Christina for the open mic portion, I just want to announce that we have a theme for next month's storytelling event. The Flame is going to continue as a monthly event for the foreseeable future, for as long as it's a success. And the theme for next month is disastrous liaisons. So we're looking for those stories of things that went terribly wrong. You have a personal story about a fiasco in your life, a terrible first date, possibly the worst jobs or bosses. We want to hear what went horribly wrong, a memory of what went horribly wrong. Disastrous liaisons. And I'm Stevie Taken again. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Christina. I'm really looking forward to hearing our new storytellers with the open mic. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the stories as much as I did. We're going to go ahead and jump into the open mic. We're going to begin with John DeFusco, and please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. So, Don DeFusco.
I don't see you. Hello. Hello, is it time to go? Must be something here.
Hi, John. Just
Hi.
popping in to say you're good to go. So begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Here we go. Very nice to meet everyone. I moved here from LA a couple of years ago, and I have been looking into the whole art scene here, and it's just nice to meet all of you. I've been reading about you on the internet. Here we go. This one is called The Man Show. It's called Lover Man. At the age of 13, I wanted to be a man. Not just any man, a movie star man, a man of power, magnetism, and romance, a lover man. I wanted girls who wore lipstick, girls who wore perfume, girls who chewed juicy fruit gum, girls in sweaters hiding their mysterious curves, girls. The State Theater on Main Street, Webster, Mass, 1960 is the place to be on Saturday afternoons. The place for young lovers to love. The place where a lover man could find girls. There's a ritual. You see a girl you like. You ask her, you want to sit with me? If you're shy like me, you get somebody else to ask her. Psst, Johnny wants to sit with you. I watch in the dark from a few rows back. She looks over her shoulder, nods her head, and I move in. I sit next to her, nervous and excited at the same time. I act like I'm watching the movie, but I'm sneaking glances at her. Slowly, Carefully, I put my arm around her. She moves closer. Soft sweater brushes my chest. Closer, closer to the mystery. Smell of juicy fruit, feelings of hope. I turn, lean in. She closes her eyes. Contact. Yes, that's right. I'm kissing. I'm kissing for a long time. I'm kissing and kissing. I feel so good about myself. I'm a lover man. I'm not sure when to stop, how to end it. So I just keep kissing. Then I get a wicked surprise. Something I never expected. Something that makes my lover man's eyes wide open. Something that sends a shudder through me. Sandy sticks her tongue in my mouth. What is that? It's the strangest thing I ever felt. I don't know what to do. I feel saliva. I taste juicy fruit. And finally it ends. I sit back and just having my arm around her and stealing glances at the mystery beneath the sweater. Later, I tell my big brother. It was so freaking weird, I tell him. I didn't know what to do. I almost got sick. He says, that's a French kiss, stupid. It's good. Maybe you'll get to feel her up next time. Well, I don't see what's so great about a French kiss. I really don't. But feeling her up, that's another story. It's a long, slow week waiting for Saturday to come around. Sitting through school with my books on my lap. Finally, it's the big day. I borrow my brother's Brill cream, my sister's movie magazine. I spend an hour combing my hair till I look exactly like Tony Curtis, a spit curl movie star man. My mom drops me off. I check my hair in the lobby. Yeah, Tony Curtis. I pay my dime, walk down the dark aisle. I see her. She's with a friend. The friend sees me, moves to another seat. I feel confident. I lean over like a lover man. You want to sit with me? Yeah. It ain't easy, but I put up with the French kissing. I have a goal now. It takes a while. Kiss, kiss, tongue, tongue, juicy fruit, kiss, kiss, tongue, tongue, juicy fruit. Then, in the dark, she takes my right wrist. She quietly guides my hand to her left breast. She breathes deep, sweater heaving. I am in awe. I can't believe I'm there. I'm feeling so good about myself. It feels better than I ever imagined. I get kind of paralyzed. I can't move. I just can't stop smiling. I just let my hand lay there. It lays there and lays there, all the way to the end of the movie. Lights come up. She pushes me away. An awkward hug. She runs off to meet her mom. I'm in the car with my mom, staring out the window, my hand on my smiling face. I think I can still feel it. Was it a good movie, Johnny? Yeah, it was okay. Must have been good. You sure are smiling a lot. Yeah, it was pretty good. Thank God she didn't ask me what it was about. That night in bed, I tried to hold on to the feeling. I put my hand on my own breast. Nothing. Not the same at all. I start kissing my hand, remembering the great moment. I hold a long, romantic movie star kiss on the palm of my hand. No tongue, just lips, just lips. I keep kissing and kissing, and I go to sleep, smiling and kissing, kissing the hand of the lover man. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Thank you for your trip down memory lane. Very passionate, enjoyed it. Let's go ahead and hear from our next open mic, Jose Vizcarra. Jose, your time begins as soon as we're ready to see you. I can see. Let's see.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes? Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody. because all writers communicate with the most powerful weapon there is and the most uh, powerful thing that the God gave us, the brain. Okay, so I came to the United States back in 1963 as a 14-year-old in awe. I did not speak English at all, and I felt so alienated being in a classroom that they were talking, and I just closed my mouth and look around. Nothing happened. So I tend to associate with people who speak the same as you. So I associated with them, so I didn't grow. The problem that we have when we immigrate to another country, we feel isolated. So we need to learn how to communicate, learn the customs. And in Mexico, every state has a different culture, different food, music, clothing. And we have a culture, right? So that's what we need to know, where we came from and where we're going. And I was in the army and I went to Korea and still have not learned English well because in school, they did not teach me because public schools they do not do a good job, involving us in the language. I look at the Europeans; they speak several languages, and they learn English better than our kids because they're passionate. Number one about learning, and if you worry about the grades, you miss the learning opportunity. You have to worry about learning, not the grades. Okay, so I served in the army and I became a United States citizen. So I'm very passionate about the country, the best country in the world. Now, I believe God did something to us to punish us for being, ignorant. So we need to, first of all, get together with the family. And this thing is bringing us together. I was having to watching sports. Now no sports. So now I don't associate with like the TV anymore. I associate with the most powerful weapons that we have created. Number one is a pencil. And why do I like pencils? Because you can erase your mistakes, right? Number two, then they create the pen. But the problem is you don't have an eraser. So if you make a mistake, you have to start all over, right? And technology creates the most powerful weapon so far, the Apple Pencil. I love this thing because, man, if you make mistake, that becomes an eraser and things like that, right? So I'm a writer and I took the time now to be with my family. My wife and my daughter sequestered me in San Diego. I live in Riverside, right? And you cannot argue against two women. You lose big time, right? Especially when they write. And I'm writing every day and I'm reading books, great books. And that's what I believe that we all should be writers. We should tell our stories. But most people don't like to write because in school they don't inspire you to write. They don't inspire you to read great books, right? And that's our story. So kids don't like to write. And some of the kids don't like to write. Say, yes, they do. Look at the walls. They're written all over the place, right? But we don't give them the power make mistakes. It's okay. Mistakes are your best friends, right? Another thing, in America, it's a capitalist society. In school, they don't teach you that. The only two positions you have to be successful in America. Number one, you have to have your own business and be an investor and hire people who know more than you to work for you. Put money to work for you. Look now how many people are in panic because they don't get paid. That is horrible. Why are you afraid of a paycheck? You should control the paycheck. You should be writing the paycheck to your employees, not waiting for that check once a month. And then that check belongs to somebody else because you got to pay all the bills, right? So now I became also creating my own business and be an investor. And the beautiful thing, I started my two grandkids before they were born to become investors. How about that? I see a 1-year-old running around has more than $1,000 in the stock market. Number two, his brother is about 2,500, 3-year-old. So once they turn 18, I told the parents, hey, those kids are mine. I'm going to teach them how to be business owners as soon as they get out of high school. Because you do not need a college education. College education is great for the ego. Don't get it wrong. Education is right, but the right education. And before I close, I learned this saying, which is true. you better prepare yourself to have the experience and the passion for what you do. And if you do, you will make more money because people want you and they will pay you more. So the key in this world is to look at the day you were born and when you're gonna die, right? That in between, that's what makes us human beings. So if you're going to be alive, answer these questions to yourself. Are you gonna be an example how to live your life? Or are you a warning how not to do it? And
Okay, virtual clapping, everybody. Thank you for that, Jose. Tim Brown, if you are here, please stand up. It's your turn for open mic. Tim Brown. And he's not here. Okay, well, maybe next time, Tim. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up our event tonight. Thank you again to all of our presenters, open mic, and the presenters who attended the workshops. I know that everyone worked hard, and just so you know, Stevie Taken is not done yet. Keep your eyes out for a chance to tell your story in her next workshops and final culminating event, The Flame. So please stay safe, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you around.